Let's talk about developing presentations for your final presentation to your company sponsors. Communication is not a one-way street. Determining how you're going to present it's just as important to consider the audience as it is to consider your message. When you look at communication, there's an old saying that says different strokes for different folks. You're going to have different ways that people like to receive their information. And so you need to consider your audience. So we're going to talk today about this communications pyramid. On the communications pyramid, you can see that it covers information like what was your original hypothesis and purpose of your project, the design of your experiment, the data that you gathered, the analysis that you did, the information and insights that were created, as well as the conclusions you reached and the recommendations that you want to present to the client. Now, if you'll notice on the right side of the slide, there is an arrow that points up, and it's called the education style. It might be called the journey style or research style. It's a pretty common approach that says you start at the bottom of the pyramid with the broad bulk of all the information and work that you've done, and you work toward the narrow top of the pyramid, which gets down to just one or two slides describing the recommendation and the conclusion. This is a very comfortable process to most students because it's how we do educational presentations. It's often how we do travelogues and journeys and other forms of entertainment types of presentations. But top executives don't like this style of presentation. In fact, it will turn them off completely and they'll stop listening. So no matter how good your idea is, no matter how good your presentation is, if you present in this style, you will lose their interest because it's not the way that they receive and process information. Executives see hundreds of presentations in a week or a month, and they are constantly seeing people give these bottom-up types of presentations. Most of them really hate this. As I've talked to them about their experiences, and in my own personal experience as an executive who had to maybe view 5 or 10 of these presentations in a day, they really put me to sleep. Because it's not how I process the information, and it's not how most executives process information. Now, how do they? So what they want to do, if you look at where it says commercial style, they want you to start by telling them, what's this presentation about? What recommendation are you going to make? What's the conclusions that you've come to, and do I think that they have any relevance in the world? If I like what you're saying, I want to learn more about why you believe that. So I want to know more about the information that caused you to make that decision. If the information is plausible and you've given support for why you believe that information is true, and it does support your conclusions, and then therefore the recommendation, at that point, executives are pretty comfortable if they believe you're credible. So you'll notice that there's a little water level. So think about this like an iceberg. 10% above the water, 90% below. If you were making a traditional presentation, 90% of what you would have shown in a traditional presentation is not shown in a top-down executive presentation. They tend to be short, concise, and get to the point. Now, executives may ask you questions about the stuff that's below the waterline. They traditionally do that only to test your credibility. If they already know that you're credible, then they probably won't ask hardly any questions below the waterline. If, on the other hand, they don't know you very well and they would like to learn something of your credibility, they will ask 1 or 2 or 3 questions about information below the waterline, about your analysis, your data, your experimentation design. They do this to see how you answer. If you answer 1 or 2 or even 3 questions with solid answers, then they perceive that you're credible and they move on to discussing implementation of the recommendation. If, on the other hand, they perceive that you're not credible, then they are going to either look to ignore the recommendation or find somebody else who is credible to come and check your work and determine whether or not the recommendation is viable. So that's the communication pyramid. You need to understand who your audience is and which way you should be presenting. For academics, for researchers, for people who are data hounds, they're probably going to want to see the education style. For business leaders, executives, heads of groups or organizations, they're probably going to want to see the commercial style. If you're not sure, my suggestion is that you use the hybrid approach. Not the hybrid in the presentation itself. I suggest when there will be a mixed room with leaders and doers that you make your presentation follow the top-down approach and you have your written report follow the education style, and you send the written report out days before the presentation to all of those who will be in the meeting. Most leaders will never read the written report. They might read the executive summary, which should be written following the commercial style, but they will very unlikely that they'll ever read the actual report. On the other hand, the doers, the data hounds, and the people who are going to have to implement this recommendation will probably read all the report before you come in. That will normally solve the problem in the two different styles. Be careful that you don't get hung up on worrying too much about will they or won't they accept my recommendation, because you should never surprise the leaders of a project. Never walk in with a surprise recommendation. You may think that's fun. Surprise birthday parties might be fun. Surprise presentations are never fun. No executive wants to be surprised in a meeting. If you try and surprise them, there's a very high likelihood that you are going to assume some things are true and build your recommendations around those assumptions, and then find out that the executives don't agree with your assumption. So by giving your recommendations early before the presentation and sharing them, you have the chance for them to come back and ask questions or give you feedback that may cause you to modify your recommendation. That's normally a safe thing to do.